a wonderful group of panelists here to join us for this conversation for a really, what I hope is a very interesting and international perspective on some of these issues. So I'm going to introduce everyone quickly, and then I'd love if you could just say a few words about what your role is and what you're doing. So we have Yuval from Digital Asset, we have Dennis, he has different roles. He's an innovator, but he is also an advisor on fintech to the government of Bermuda. We also have Jason, who is in government in Taiwan, and Kairat, who comes from Kazakhstan, and AISC, which is an extremely innovative new regulatory body in Kazakhstan, and Alan Cohn, who's a partner at Steptoe and Johnson. So, Yuval, if you can just start by telling us a little bit about what you do at Digital Asset, and then we'll go down the line and get into the meat of the conversation.
So, thank you for being here. Thank you for having us. At Digital Asset, in short, you focus on developing smart contracts that are chain agnostic. So we believe that one of the issues with adoption of DLT is that businesses have to choose a winner. They have to bet on which chain will be the chain that wins in the future. And they don't like to bet their businesses on a technology winner. So one of the things that we are focused is how can you create an application development that doesn't force the business to choose a winner from a chain perspective, and can actually port the application from one to another.
Excellent. And Dennis?
All right, so I'm the Chief FinTech Advisor for Bermuda. I'm basically driving national strategy and our approach to the space. And I can draw some parallels where, in the same way, I'll just mention the challenges with aligning yourself to a technology. A lot of our strategy involves around creating the right regulatory environment, but also embracing the private sector to innovate. Because if we align ourselves to specific technologies on identity or like a central bank digital currency, there's tremendous risks associated with that. So how do we really support private sector, support innovators, and allow it to grow the ecosystem itself, as opposed to trying to steer it? So.
And Jason, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Taiwan?
Sure. So I'm a legislator and a member of Parliament from Taiwan. And before becoming a legislator, I was a tech entrepreneur. So my friends joke that when I became a politician, I joined the dark side. But I feel it's important that for someone like me who understand the language of politics and language of technology to bridge the gap. So in Taiwan, my mandate is to remove legal barriers for innovation. So on blockchain and crypto side, I promote the deregulation of the blockchain and also right regulation for crypto. So Taiwan becomes the first jurisdiction to exclude or exempt security tokens from security laws. This law, which I sponsored, has been passed in our parliament. Would be the first one in Asia to do so. And we are now also looking at tokenizing some of our state-owned assets. For example, National Grid. We're looking at tokenizing it and allow the civilians and general public to have a way to understand the new type of economy that we are sort of promoting. So I think it's important that regulations are part of discussion in this panel, and this year I think regulatory clarity will be very, very important as we move forward with this industry.
Kairat, can you tell us a little bit about what you're trying to do at AISC?
Yeah, so we are developing quite a new project in Central Eurasia region. We are developing a financial center based on English common law with an independent court and independent regulator, trying to develop a comfortable environment for foreign investors coming to our region, and for developing financial services with flexible regulation. And one of our main pillars is fintech. Again, blockchain become one of most significant dimension of fintech development, and that's where we partner with GBDC and learning international experience and trying to implement it in our region and on track attract foreign blockchain companies and develop our local talents too. So, and I'm personally responsible and supervising fintech dimension.
Thank you so much. And Alan, it would be great to hear just a little bit about your background and also how you set up the blockchain practice at Steptoe.
Sure. So, thank you, Christina. It's great to be with all of you. I am a partner at Steptoe & Johnson. I came to Steptoe & Johnson just about 5 years ago from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. I was an assistant secretary there and focused on a range of different issues, including ones that gave me the early exposure to cryptocurrency, unfortunately as instrumentality of crime. But the promise of the technology was very clear. With my colleague Jason Weinstein, who had come from the Department of Justice, we set up a blockchain practice at Steptoe in 2015. We began by creating an organization called Blockchain Alliance on behalf of some of the organizations in Washington, D.C., which is a forum for the industry to engage with law enforcement and regulators. We then created a practice that's really rooted in the firm's strength and background as a regulatory firm, and a firm that helps both U.S. and non-U.S. companies understand how to navigate the U.S. environment. So over the last 5 years, we've helped companies across the industry, across this ecosystem, understand kind of the myriad types and flavors of U.S. regulation, and understand how to navigate the U.S. regulatory environment in a risk-aware manner.
Thank you so much, and I truly feel very privileged to be joined by this depth and breadth of experience. And I'd like to start by talking a little bit about Bermuda, Taiwan, and Kazakhstan. GBBC is very global, and we have members in over 50 countries, and basically every place we visit, both the innovators and the legislators claim that they're trying to make their jurisdiction compatible with innovation. They want to attract business development, but sometimes it's difficult to identify the specific mechanisms they're deploying to do that. And I'd love to hear just kind of practically what you've done to encourage folks to set up shop in your various jurisdictions, and maybe some of the pain points that you've experienced trying to do that. So, Dennis, can we start with you?
Sure. So, we really try, like every jurisdiction is trying to be innovative. I think it's about finding your niche. I mean, we try and build upon our history. We have a 30-year history in the insurance space, primarily captive and reinsurance. So it gives us a really solid foundation for building upon that for expansion into other forms of financial services. Last week we got a CFAT assessment went public, and we were at an excellent rate. So we have a very high standard. We try to create a regulatory environment that provides clarity. So we have a very broad definition of digital asset. We have a main license around regulating and managing the risks. And we have a sandbox environment that allows you to reduce the scope and work within like a reduced scope to be able to drive more innovation and access to customers. And our regulations are business plan driven and principles driven as opposed to rule based. The challenge is when you look at the global scope of innovation, it's really hard to turn around and say, as a former tech entrepreneur, well, still a tech entrepreneur, how do you innovate a business model when you don't know what it's going to be? As you're figuring it out, how do you manage that business model and then encumber yourself with tons of regulation that needs to be updated, or tons of compliance and policy that needs to be updated every single time your business changes? It adds tremendous amounts of cost. So this is one of the challenges that we face in this year. We have many companies that have come to get regulated, but it's difficult to manage documenting exactly what your business is going to be and then exactly how you're going to fulfill the compliance, custody, and cybersecurity requirements, and then be able to demonstrate how that's going to work. So it's been a really high barrier, and we see the examples of like Deribit is concerned about the AML changes in the Netherlands. They've decided to move to Panama, right? And you have a lot of this industry that if the regulations are too difficult to progress through, like if there's no graduated program to work with an ever-changing or a startup business, then companies will move to jurisdictions that have no regulations, no consumer protections. So we're exploring how do we create more of a foundation that allows you to explore under the guidance of our regulator more of an ability to figure out your business model and then start scaling, then start saying, I'm going to apply increased risk management policies. Like we have at our core an innovation hub which allows you to work in a private like test, but work within the supervision of the regulator so that you can then progress to public facing businesses. So I'll leave it there and turn it over to hear from my colleagues.
Yeah, so in Taiwan, we see regulation as a form of innovation. So we really see laws and legislations and regulations as a way that we show our strength and encouragement for entrepreneurs and startups to innovate in Taiwan. So we set up the sandbox program and other things. For example, we have an entrepreneurship visa where if you are a tech entrepreneur, you come and then you have tax benefits and a bunch of other stuff to make it easy for you to do business in Taiwan. But in terms of blockchain and crypto, I'll use this case as an illustration in terms of how we approach regulation. In November 2018, I amended Article 5 in anti-money laundering law, which I incorporate virtual assets, or also known as cryptocurrency, into AML. And Taiwan becomes the first jurisdiction to regulate and to consider the AML and anti-money laundering practice as the necessary prerequisite for crypto exchanges. So all crypto operators must comply with specific AML law in order to run business in Taiwan. So this looks like a slap in the face, but I would argue that. Because after I amended that article, I also moved forward to set up a business category under Ministry of Economic Affairs for crypto-related business. So if you run a cryptocurrency exchange in Taiwan, you can come register as a legit business category in Taiwan, supported by our government. Tax laws and accounting laws, all these are very transparent and very ready to be incorporated. So all this is important. That's why I talk about regulatory clarity. I think for this industry, for the last few years, this regulatory ambiguity is the way that sort of given this industry somehow a shady reputation, but countries or jurisdictions who have the boldness to set the bar and also to set a boundary, a reasonable boundary, to encourage innovation and at the same time protect consumers' data, consumers' money, I think will really, trailblaze the path forward. And reason why I say this is because if you look at Libra and the challenges that Libra faces in the US Congress, and with comparing against the speed with which Chinese government in Beijing is innovating in light speed, within 6 months this year, China would come out with their own digital currency, DCEP. So jurisdictions that are ready with their regulation will be the first movers to connect with countries that are doing big stuff. And I believe US is very slow in this regard, and it has its own merit to be slow because it's one of the world's most important financial markets. But Taiwan and Bermuda, we are rather flexible and agile, and we are prone to vulnerabilities. So we just want to make ourselves competitive and really aggressive in this regard. So that's why we exempt security tokens from security laws, make it easy so this industry can run in the bright daylight instead of driving them into a dark tunnel where there's no exit. So it's important that we encourage regulations. We encourage players in this industry to play together and help us figure out what type of regulation is needed. And we are doing that with blockchain and crypto. We're also doing that with AI and a bunch of other stuff. So I would say regulation is a form of competitiveness and a way to innovate.
Thank you so much. Kairat, can you just briefly explain what AIFC is and how you're trying to attract innovation?
Yeah, thanks. It was very interesting what you're discussing about. So, and I would say that our central bank and all central banks in Central Asia, in Eurasia at all, quite conservatives in terms of development, especially everything which connected with cryptocurrencies, etc. So, and that's why we have created a separate regulator which can be more flexible and more friendly to these new technologies, implementations and regulation. And we also, it's nothing new, we have created our sandbox, which is divided for sandbox for regulation, which we don't have. For example, for fintech companies which willing to start business, to make business there, and we don't have a regulation for them, so we can develop regulation with them. So we can negotiate, we can do something like for particular company, and for also for new startups, newly founded startups, we making the same approach, helping them to make this balance, because every regulator has have to keep the balance between innovation and customer protection. In this case, we understand all responsibility, and we probably move quite slow in if you can compare with like some global Singapore, Hong Kong, or Taiwan. But so we are trying to follow all the trends. We created a framework for crypto regulation a couple years before, but we are not like making, we are not trying to make a lot of companies in Kazakhstan like doing this crypto business, etc. We mostly support blockchain projects at all, and some of crypto projects, but with credible companies known worldwide, and trying to allow them to do business in Kazakhstan and Eurasia, fully compliant, and mostly we suggest to start in sandbox and test it with certain limitations. But and they can test markets, they can test technologies, they can test regulation with us, and we can make amendments to regulation in short period for particular company. So I think that this approach of our approach, like not to make a lot of projects in this sphere, but make one-to-one, but in good environment and good conditions.
Thank you so much, and I do think it's pretty fascinating to see these unorthodox industries creating paradigms that are much more sophisticated and kind of comprehensive than what we're seeing in more traditional areas. The United States, regardless of its dominance, has not been seen as a beacon of light in terms of clarity, or creating an environment where it's easy to innovate. And I'm wondering, Alan, what are some of the lessons, perhaps, that we can learn from these other jurisdictions, and where can we really improve?
Well, I thought it was a really good insight about the challenge of agile government and agile governance. The U.S. government just generally struggles with that. It's big. There are many agencies. Oversight is fractured. So it's not a surprise that the U.S. government is wrestling with how to comprehensively oversee and regulate this space. That said, there are definitely points of light and points of challenge. I think that one of the things that everything it's gotten right, and I think it echoes where we hear examples from Libra, Taiwan, or probably in Singapore or Switzerland, is involvement in the industry early. There were, among the U.S. regulators, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the anti-money laundering regulator, was very early entrant in this space, making public statements as early as 2013, advising companies as to how to follow anti-money laundering rules with respect to cryptocurrency. Their path of regulatory guidance from 2013 to now wasn't always popular, and the agencies and companies in the industry right now are wrestling with things like travel rule, which is part of that regulatory scheme. But clear, consistent guidance, cumulative, and consistent, I think is an example of the way that a regulator can look effectively into the space. And because of the way that the regulator works, by having a registration regime rather than a licensing regime, by requiring suspicious activity reporting, which gave them great insight into the industry, it gives them a level of sophistication that here echoed the level of sophistication and understanding the government of Bermuda, the government of Taiwan, and other governments that we've talked about. I think that the U.S. would be great and easy if we could say that the U.S. should learn the lessons of Switzerland or Singapore, Bermuda, Gibraltar, some of the other governments that have issued comprehensive regulation in this space. But the challenge is that the U.S. regulators, particularly around financial instruments, are fragmented. You don't have a single integrated financial regulator. You have to get consensus among various regulators, each of whom are rightfully concerned about the scope of their jurisdiction, and all of them are reluctant to voluntarily cede jurisdiction, which makes it almost more remarkable when you see statements in FinCEN's comprehensive guidance from May of last year, where they state, look, things like decentralized exchanges or unhosted wallets are just not covered. They're not covered entities under our rules. So I think that there are real and important structural reasons why it's going to take time for the U.S. government to sort through its regulatory posture in this space, and that are going to interfere with the ability of the U.S. government to be as agile as I think the industry would like. But I definitely think that there are lessons to be seen from other jurisdictions, and I think the best thing we can do to help the U.S. regulatory environment is help encourage and stimulate that kind of comprehensive regulatory development outside of the United States, so that there are effective models to point to say, look, here are principles and concepts of regulation that are working, we can bring into the United States that are consistent with the way that we look at regulation of these types of instruments that have characteristics of this new type of asset.
Thank you so much. I think that fragmentation is something that we hear as kind of a perennial challenge of all of the companies in the United States that we work with who are trying to innovate in this space. And Yuval, you have the privileged position of actively building one of the most prominent projects in this space in Australia, and you started years ago. And I'm wondering how you did that, how you interacted with the regulators you knew you were going to be subject to, and how you choose a jurisdiction to work in given all of these complications.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to start that I wish we had more Jasons as regulators, because things would be much easier. But I think that one of the things that we have done in Australia, so in Australia we've gotten the Treasury Secretary to approve our project.
Can you just explain a little bit what the project is? So I had the privilege about a year ago of touring the initial stages of it, and it's pretty incredible. So please tell us about it.
So this year we are going to move the entire Australian equity market on blockchain. So every security of a public company in Australia is going to be cleared and settled on a blockchain. So you can imagine the pressure if that goes down. The Australian market, which is a G10 country, is going to stop working. So it required, a lot of thought process, and I think that some of the comments that were made about fragmentation. I mean, that's a fact, and when you have systems that are fragmented, they're going to move slower. But I think what we have done is we wanted to think about, can you use this technology and actually apply it within the regulatory framework? Do you actually have to change the regulatory framework? We actually worked with a few law firms of thinking, well, if you're going to do collateral management on a blockchain, can you actually comply with the regulatory framework? And a lot of times, a lot of the innovators in this space want to think about what's possible from a technology perspective, but they forget that we're dealing with money, we're dealing with value, and then you ask yourself, well, what happens when you go bankrupt? What happens to the asset? And suddenly they're like, what do you mean? What's so special about bankruptcy? And then they go and they talk to some lawyers and they understand how much law is written about bankruptcy. So one of the things that we have done very early on is we start thinking, can we innovate with this technology without actually changing the regulatory framework? Because we here, most of the people are comfortable with technology. We know that technology owns law. It grows at an exponential pace. Regulators are not for profit, right? They have constituents that they have to worry about. They have decisions that they need to make that, for the most part, has only downside risk, right? They don't make millions of dollars if they made the right decisions. So if you take that into consideration and you think, what motivates a regulator, right? Whether that regulator comes from a fragmented environment or from an environment that has a lot of upside, and you take that into consideration and you start putting that into your decision making, I actually think that there's a lot of opportunities to work with regulators. So we don't choose use cases or projects that first stage of success relies on regulatory change. Good luck with that. To me, that is a bet that as a startup I cannot make. There's a lot of big businesses like Google, Microsoft, Amazon that to them they have endless amount of runway and they can play the long game. We cannot play the long game. So we usually choose. We don't have a specific country that we operate in multiple countries. But if the first question is, this law needs to change for you to be successful on day one, we're like, no, thank you. We'll let some of the crypto people go after that. So that's one thing. And I think what companies in our space can do better, and we have David Tree from Accenture, who we all owe to, who has done a lot of education. I think that regulation will move faster if we educate them, right? Rather than go in and say, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, and immediately, again, only downside risk. They're like, whoa, stop, thank you, come back in a year, right? It's already frightening, right? Rather than taking the approach of, we appreciate what you're trying to do, we understand what you're trying to do, we understand the complexities, and figure out how can you work with that kind of framework.
Thank you so much. And I think this point on education is so critical, and it really depends on what jurisdiction you're in. When we were in Australia, I was shocked actually by the sophistication of regulators and legislators there in terms of their understanding of the space. By comparison, in the United States, it is sometimes absolutely dumbfounding, like how little they know about any of this and technology in general. And I'm wondering, from the regulators on stage, how you interact and engage with innovators, and what those lines of communication look like, because it seems like it's pretty critical that they stay open, but you also need to streamline them in some way or another.
So, in Taiwan, instead of directly changing the law, my approach, because I've been an entrepreneur, is always sort of iterate, right? So you, instead of take this kind of one-stop shop approach, but you actually work with the community. So first step I took was I set up a SRO, self-regulatory organizations. So this as a platform to mitigate the concern from the regulators, because I'm a sort of unconventional, unorthodox, and outlier in my government. This is such a new technology. If you sort of 30 years ago when internet was just kind of emerging, you're basically facing the same deal. And are you going to regard it as a threat, or you see it as opportunities?
and countries or governments embracing these uncertainties and somehow put together ways that they can help the system evolve will eventually reap the benefits of the progress. And so I set up the SRO, and SRO are essentially a safe harbor for the operators, for entrepreneurs, and also for agencies. We also work with Accenture, KPMG, and some of those agencies really been really helpful for our government. So we do a lot of research papers and provide consultation papers and positioning papers for legislators. So the way I do is that I go around different corners of the parliament on both aisles, try to recruit more people to become the believers of blockchain and crypto. So good luck with that, right? Yeah. But so I set up this thing called a Parliamentary Coalition for Blockchain and Cryptocurrency in my apartment, in our apartment, and luckily, 35 out of 113 senators. We only have one house, so we are all senators. 35 out of 113 members of our parliament joined from cross-party, and so obviously they don't know too much in detail about what this is, but you know, I make it almost like a carnival for them to see. Wow, Parliament can be so energetic, so much energy, and a lot of new opportunities. So they end up all signing my sponsoring my legislation. So the way I approach this is really see it as a way to recruit your essentially your partners in crime, and instead of politicizing it, I make it a effort from the society, from the bottom up. So we hosted several, consultation meetings, public hearings in our parliament. I brought Vitalik to speak at our parliament. That's why he gave me the nickname, Crypto Congressman. All of you should come and get a card from me because I have that nickname printed on my card. It's a mandate from the Speaker of the House that allow me to print that nickname on my card. So all of the things, this way I do it, make it less serious, but I make it fun and educational for my counterparts to learn as well.
I agree with Yuval. We have to clone Jason. He's just too good. But can you speak a little bit, Dennis, to the communication channels you have in Bermuda?
I'm not necessarily a regulator. I'm more of an advisor to the government. So I want to make that clear that I'm not speaking for a regulator. It is independent. You always have to qualify yourself. Disclaimer, yes. We built our insurance industry by collaborating closely with the industry to understand what the problems are. And we're taking that model and applying it again today. It's like going out to events like this and having close conversations with the industry to understand what are the challenges, what drives adoption, what stops adoption, what aren't people understanding, and really on both our regulator front and our government front, really educating ourselves as opposed to waiting to be educated so that we can go out and say, have you tried this, have you tried that, not just on the regulatory front, but also with your business. Like, it's one of the most amazing things is seeing one of our regulators sit down with a group of companies, and they're talking about the challenges of getting insurance coverage in the industry, and him saying, well, why don't you create a captive amongst yourselves, like a self-regulatory company that can insure the risk yourselves. And they were all blown away because they're used to the US regulators, and they're just thinking, wow, how could a regulator be making suggestions? Well, not suggestions, but just mentioning it as something that could be considered. So we try and consult and understand.
That's, I think, a really kind of refreshing perspective. And Kyra, I'd love to hear briefly what AIFC does to engage directly with the folks who are planning to work in your jurisdiction.
I wanted to make a disclaimer too that I'm responsible for development in the AIFC, for fintech development, and regulator runs another guys. We have special division in our regulator for dedicated to fintech development, and who is responsible for this development of rules, regulations, issuing license, etc. But how do we communicate with them? First of all, we as a development division, we created special FinTech Advisory Council, which Sandra, with thanks to Sandra, she is in this council. And we invited to this council global policymakers, global business representatives, founders, CEOs, etc. And we are meeting several times a year and trying to and show them, and our regulator shows them their plans, what they're doing, how they're like changing, what they're going to issue, etc. And they kind of judge it. They make their responses for it, and sometimes there are debates between even between this our members of advisory council, because sometimes opinions are so different. And but it's very effective. It's for me personally, it's a special instrument to influence to our regulator, to show them that that's what business requires. That's how they suggest to protect, for example, consumers. So to find this balance, which I was talking about. And also, as we in authority, we make recommendations to our regulator, and I'm also personally involved in a commission which considers this, startups to be in sandbox. And I can say that we have great progress in working with our regulator, because in the beginning, I was on a startup site, and I always just told them that it wasn't going to work. So it's very tough regulations. You have to do more exemptions, etc. And now they found this, I think, this balance, and now it's more comfortable. And they just showing me, so we are doing this, and I think that it should work. So we are making these responses from from business, from market side. And they reflect quite fastly. So, and I think that's how should regulator work, I think.
Over the last 6 months, maybe 8 months now, we've seen the announcement of Libra, which at least in the United States seems to have really accelerated conversations on this subject. And I'm curious, especially from you, Alan, and you, Yuval, in your conversations either with clients, with legislators, with others around the world, how that announcement has transformed those conversations that you're having?
Well, I think that as a starting point, Libra has definitely put this issue on the front burner for a lot of agencies, a lot of legislators who were not there before. It was very difficult before the Libra announcement to get a meeting, get any attention from particularly financial services committees about cryptocurrency or crypto assets, blockchain technology, because it wasn't really that relevant. After the announcement of Libra, all of a sudden, these are the types of assets that can fundamentally threaten the US dollar and the US economy. So that's a pretty rapid change in terms of prioritization. Second, unfortunately for Libra, I think the Libra Association and Calibra in particular ended up taking a lot of fire that was directed at the industry from a position of less knowledge than would be optimal. And so a lot of the attention and a lot of that initial fear got focused right onto that project. And when we started the Blockchain Alliance in 2015 with associations in DC and a number of the GBBC member companies, it was really on the concept that regulators and law enforcement agencies needed to understand the technology if they weren't going to have a knee-jerk reaction of fear about the technology. And I think we worked hard, the companies that are members of the Blockchain Alliance worked very hard to make themselves available to companies, to regulators and law enforcement, in the same way that companies did at the advent of the commercial internet, with programs like InfraGard or the Electronic Crimes Task Forces in the United States. But in this instance, the industry was going to government proactively. And I think we saw the reaction with the Libra announcement, where agencies that were familiar with the technology didn't panic. And agencies and legislators that had pushed the technology aside felt that they really needed to catch up, and their first instinct reaction was clear. Now, I think that as a result, we've seen some benefit. I think some of our regulatory agencies have felt a little bit more pressure to continue to release guidance on how, particularly around the crypto asset side, for blockchain technology as an enabling technology. That's much more about bridging into existing regulatory regimes, as you've already said. But in crypto assets, you've seen an uptick in the release of guidance so far. But there's also been an uptick in the need to educate and the need to bring the temperature down and to make sure people understand what this asset is, how the Libra project fits into that, what the role of the Libra Association is, what the role of the member companies are, the role of Libra and other developers will be, and how an ecosystem like that works, and how it compares to a similar ecosystem that doesn't use a crypto asset. So I think that it's been beneficial in some ways. I think that the association in Libra in particular took a lot of arrows from a lot of people from that reaction of fear. But I do think, and I think it's pointed out that there's a lot more work on a lot of fronts to do.
Yuval, have you seen any change over the last months as you've worked to move into different jurisdictions and engage with new decision makers?
Well, we saw the announcement from CryptoDad a week ago, and we saw the announcement by what is it, Bank of England, Canada, Japan, ECB. So yes, I think that Alan was spot on, and what you saw is that knee-jerk reaction. But it goes back to what I was saying earlier: is you have Cambridge Analytics, and then you're going to announce this with no education, with no preparation. I know a few people that have been talking to Facebook ahead of this announcement and have highly recommended them talk to the regulators before you do this. Make sure that they are prepared for this. And they refused to do that, and they went ahead for, I'm sure that they had their reasons for doing it, but at the end of the day, I think that they just set the ground for others to really excel. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing things changing. Not sure that it's always, going to be necessarily good for Calibra or Libra, unfortunately, because they are trying to do change, which is a good thing. I think that the approach they took is not necessarily the best.
Can I comment on that? Yeah, I totally agree with our panelists. I think it's a question of positioning. And I think when Libra approached US government, particularly Congress, about this idea, it was perceived as a way Facebook wants to disrupt the financial world and somehow replacing the existing financial infrastructure. But the way I see it is, there is a much bigger conversation needed in this space for a new type of a digital form of money that would essentially address some of the issues that our analog paper-based notes money that are somehow unable to or inadequate in addressing. So when I look at this, I actually see this is a ideological war between the old economy and new economy. And obviously, folks in the political world are slowest to change because the best way for them to stay in power is by not changing, right? Who would want a change of seats in their own parliament? And so I think that positioning is very important. And I remember vividly when Mark Zuckerberg testified in front of the House of Financial Committee, he said that if US doesn't do this, other country will do it. And funnily, 3 days later, Xi Jinping, Chinese president, announced that they will do a DCEP, which is a digital currency electronic payment system, which is a way for the China to decouple themselves from the US dollars, which is also a way for China to be able to emerge as a competitive opponent from the ongoing trade war with the US. So I see the next phase of the trade war even moving away from tariffs or tax on the goods, export goods like soybeans and steel and other things, but moved towards the digital world. And this has everything to do with weaponizing currency as a way to dominate the world. And so I think the larger conversation we need to help regulators and the politicians to understand is that we are no longer in this analog kind of way of transacting value. We are actually coming to the, I would call it the phase 2 of the internet, which is going from the internet of information to internet of value. And so if countries and governments and politicians are able to comprehend this in a way that's constructive and then making policies and legislations that would pave the foundation for this transition to be made, we will open up a whole new set of opportunities, and this will truly set forth the financial inclusion and then solve a lot of problems that we are seeing today, including poverty and inequality and so many other areas. So I think that positioning is important, and that was what I felt went wrong when that congressional testimony was happened there.
So we're going to change pace a little bit because we do not have a lot of time left, and I feel like we have a lot left to cover. So rapid fire down the line. This technology has been around for over 10 years, but it continues to change dramatically. Are we too early for standards? Or do international organizations that manage standards need to take a more active role? We'll start with you, Alan.
Tough question. We're never too early.
Hopefully not too tough.
We're never too early for principles. We're never too early for gathering industry and government and the academics and service providers who think about these issues and developing sets of principles and concepts that we can orient around. Progressing to standards is a tough question because of the pace of technology, and I think that things like sandboxes and other things that bring regulators closer to the industry and the evolution of the industry are going to be just as important as standards efforts that are important, but perhaps not as important yet.
I think that
rapid fire.
I think that it's nothing new in the situation, including Libra, because technology have been always ahead of regulation. And I think that it is a message again from one side to regulator to be more flexible, and to business to be more to make business development step by step. Because I don't think that Libra is something special in terms of regulation, but Libra is and Facebook is very influence in this business. That's why I think that they got this reaction.
Okay, so I'm going to take that as 2 no's, or no, 2 yeses. We are too early for standardization right now. Jason?
No, I didn't tell it.
No, my thing is very simple. I think it's better to be early than being late. And I think it's important to evolve and iterate. And I think it's important for governments to think like startups. I know it's hard, but I think if governments are able to work together with entrepreneurs, I think this is something different than anything that we have seen. It's fundamentally challenging our way of system and how everything runs. So definitely, I think it's better to be early than to be late.
I don't think we can force standards to happen. I think there's something that when you create an ecosystem that it can evolve, we're going to see the kind of interoperability that we need to see. But I don't think it's something that we can say, let's get a bunch of people in a room and then tell everybody that we're struggling to regulate, they need to follow these standards. It's not realistic.
Yeah, I think that people coming together is a good thing, but I don't see standards in cloud, for example. But Google came out with Kubernetes, and everybody said that's a really good innovation, and we'll adopt it. So, I think yes and no. There are certain components, maybe there is a good place for standards, but I think really let people innovate and have people talk, so maybe there are common themes.
Excellent. Alan, just to go back to the United States quickly, what are the bright spots you've seen in terms of regulation there? I think there are few, so this will be short.
Yes. Number one, I think that the May 2019 guidance from FinCEN is a bright spot. Comprehensive, consistent with guidance going back to 2013, a compilation and clarity for companies, and again, statements that this is not in our jurisdiction, this is not in our jurisdiction. I think that finally the release of some no action letters from the SEC is a positive trend, although they still have not gotten at the questions that are really at the heart of the uncertainty in the industry. And I think that the IRS, starting to give guidance is also a good first step, though more is necessary there. And we started to see just a little bit of daylight in the New York bit license regime with some proposed changes that I think are positive and hopefully not only can be incorporated, but hopefully are harbingers for things to come.
Thank you. So it seems that there are some really challenging and kind of inescapable frictions that come up when you have innovation trying to fit into some very rigid models. And I'm wondering, because you all come at this from pretty different perspectives, what advice you would give to, depending on your background, an innovative company or a regulator who's trying to be innovative in terms of trying to kind of reduce some of those frictions. So when you have these very sophisticated, for example, regulatory models, relatively naive startup companies, what would you tell the startup company? And on the part of the regulators and the governments, how can you ease some of that tension? So we'll start with Yuval and then go down the line.
Yeah, so I'll start with the innovator first. Like I said, have an appreciation to who you're talking and understand your customer, understand your regulator. Carnegie said, always understand what the other side is trying to do, what they want, what they like, and act accordingly. I think that the regulators should also start asking themselves not only what are the decisions that we need to make, but how do we make decisions? I think that regulators can innovate how they make decisions, actually come with a bit more of a systematic effort of saying, well, what I'm being asked, what are the consequences of it going wrong? What are the implications? Who is affected? And potentially there are decisions that could be made really fast, like, you know, an SRO. I love that, right? One of the reasons why SROs were created is because they created this environment where they said, okay, here's a limited scope of what you could regulate, and we're letting you we're giving you the green light to move faster. So that is very creative. So I think that regulators should also start thinking about what is the system under which they make decisions and how do they make decisions, not only what are the decisions that they have to make.
I guess on the innovator side, it's about having a conversation. I mean, many jurisdictions are willing to talk and understand and learn, and it's largely about understanding the regulator's job, and that's manage the risks. From the regulator's perspective, it's about trying to figure out how do you allow someone to graduate through that risk management? How do you provide an environment that innovation can occur and you don't stifle it?
I would say don't dwell on small things. I think the challenges that we face today will be overcome in a matter of time. But instead of focusing on smaller things, but focus on big picture and think in the grand scheme of things, what problems you're solving. And I think in the space of crypto and blockchain, there are so many other things that need to be addressed. What about the security issue? What about privacy? What about definition of digital assets? What about the way with which that we treat our digital trail in the form of crypto and encrypted kind of space? And help government understand those concepts in relation to what technology that you are developing or what business you are working on, and help them understand in a way that machine is progressing in a way that's affecting our daily fabric of our life and challenging our social norm. And that would mean that our entire society moves forward with the way you're doing your business and the way your thinking and your philosophy is helping to influence and maximize the effect that you are creating. So as entrepreneurs, I think you set out there to solve problem instead of fixing little things. And I think that's where this thing is exciting to me.
Kyra, any advice to innovators?
Yeah, to innovators, I think that innovators doing their job, doing their product, just have to think about customers to sell, and including being more responsible on customers' risks and customers' needs. For regulators, I would say that any regulator have to learn how to be more flexible in terms of to regulate these new types of product, new types of services. That's why we have to develop RegTech, so new technology and regulations. Otherwise, regulators can make old approach to this new technology services. It doesn't work like this. So they have to use technology to regulate technology. So we know that we are in World Economic Forum. We know that fourth industrial revolution is here almost, and it makes the regulator's job more difficult because everything changes. You were talking about standards. What's a standard? So it was like I can understand why U.S. for example regulations so tough, because U.S. Security market was very aggressive in early stages. That's why this regulation becomes so tough. So to protect from one side and to develop from another side. And we know that U.S. regulation is most developed in the world in security business, right? So, but now, so it's new technology make new challenges for regulators, and we need to be regulators have to be more dynamic in terms of these changes and the standards. Well, while I was thinking about making the standard, you have to develop new standards already.
Alan, any advice for regulators, innovators, and closing thoughts?
For innovators, I think you have to take the compliance obligations seriously. It's a bad thing if regulation is driving innovation, but innovation has to be cognizant of regulation. Although the one thing that we have seen, and it runs contrary to how one thinks about regulation, is that almost every innovation in this space, and in many others, was from companies leaning forward in a thoughtful manner and creating innovative models and bringing them to regulators and looking for that approval. From the regulatory perspective, I think you just have to get out and see and feel that this technology. Whatever it is that you're regulating, you have to have a familiarity with it. And I know from my time in government, that's often frowned upon. It's seen as leaving the office, not doing your work, taking junkets. But you have to go see and visit with the people who are innovating in the space which you're trying to innovate, where you're trying to regulate, because you can't understand the technology or the industry just by sitting in your office. You have to get out and you have to see.
Thank you so much, and I'm grateful for all of your efforts to engage more directly with kind of traditionally siloed bodies that aren't always connected, and encouraged by those efforts and excited to continue the conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you.